So I'd like to reconvene the Lane County Board of Commissioners regular meeting for Tuesday, April 17, 2018, and we are in our afternoon session here. And our first item of business is 13A, which is discussion authorization of Class 4 all-terrain vehicle access on county roads. And I think we're trying to boot up our presentation here from Dan. And there's a different phrase for Class 4 all-terrain vehicles, isn't there? Don't they get commented?
Side-by-sides, I think, is the...
Yeah. Just for those out in the public that may not know what a Class 4 all-terrain vehicle is.
Right. I've been learning in the process of it.
So welcome, Dan.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Board. So we're here for just a discussion item today at the request of the city. We do have Mayor Coey here with us today. It's about ATVs, all-terrain vehicles, and access on county roads. The city would like to be able to have more festivals for economic development, tourism, to allow people to drive their ATVs from the city out county roads and accessing the forest roads. They do an annual side-by-side festival and have plans to promote more opportunities around this type of recreation. So at the county, we have some concerns around this, particularly around safety and also around the legalities of are we able to do this or not. In the 2017 legislative session, the legislature passed Senate Bill 344, which purportedly allowed jurisdictions to open roads for access to these larger class ATV vehicles. However, I've read through it a few times and I don't see where that authority lies in that document. We've tried to do a little research on this and it's not clear to me, and we do have Andy Clark here for legal counsel to talk about the legality issues, but my reading of that bill is it sets up a state committee to review routes for possible opening for ATVs, but it doesn't clearly state anyway that it allows the county to make roads available. So the city has passed an ordinance, and I'd be curious to hear more from the city on where they feel the authority lies. But an ordinance went into effect the first of the year, allowing city access on city roads to these ATVs. So we're here just for a discussion today. I have Orrin Schumacher and Jennifer Paw here from the Road Maintenance Division. We have permitted for special events the allowance on specific roads for these types of vehicles, and we have an intergovernmental agreement with the city to allow that up to 1 mile outside of the UGB, if I'm remembering correctly. So with that, I just kind of wanted to open this discussion to the board to see what are your questions around this, what are your feelings, and then we have Sheriff Trapp here also to talk about law enforcement issues on this and some safety issues.
Excellent. So I'll open it up to the board for questions. Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you very much. Yeah, when I was looking over this agenda item, I did a little bit of research, and they had on the Oregon Department of Transportation website some discussion of off-road vehicles and all-terrain vehicles and the different definitions. And I thought that some of these vehicles were excluded from public roads and highways and county roads. Is that accurate?
That's my understanding. They're not currently allowed. Where I've heard that the city feels there's authority is there is a section in the ORS that says the ATVs can drive on roads that are posted for their use, but that doesn't mean that we have the authority to post these roads. So I'm not sure how you.
So if and also, I understand that there's different categories of these vehicles, off-road vehicles, like you said, sometimes called the, side-by-sides, and different ways of describing different types of these vehicles. And so, are we basically in an exploratory period where we're trying to figure out if the city can do it and if the county can do it? And then onto the federal lands, if they can do it?
I think that's where we're at. We're exploring the legalities of it, and also what is the board's tolerance for risk around this.
Yeah.
There may be a case where we allow ATVs onto these roads, and then there's a collision between a car and an ATV, and I think I know who's going to win in that one. But then are we at any sort of liability for allowing the ATV on the road? So I think those are questions that we need to explore, and the board needs.
Also, I don't know if this was of interest to our board, but according to Wikipedia, which I know is just the definitive research tool, but it says most fatalities occur in white men over the age of 55. Now, I don't know if that covers all of the commissioners. I don't really know all of the commissioners' ages, but I don't know if that was the fatalities cover white men over the age of 55. I just a little too close to home. So is that...
I think there are some concerns around these, and the ORS does have stipulations on safety equipment, so the lights, people need to have helmets, they have to have insurance if they're going to be driving on roads.
Which is separate from the requirements if they were to take a vehicle to the sand dunes or some other public
Correct.
non-road area.
That's my understanding. So as the board explores this, I think you should consider whether you want to do a blanket allowance for all roads leading out of Oak Ridge, which I think we maybe want to be more conservative on that. The city's at this point is really prioritizing 3 specific roads to get access into the forest roads, and you may want to limit where we're allowing this use.
And is there an age limit or age minimum or age maximum, say 54, just hypothetical? No. Is there an age minimum or an age maximum of the use of all-terrain vehicles on roads in Oregon?
It's my understanding, I don't think there's a maximum, but the minimum follows the same rules around automobiles. So 16 driver's license, and
you don't need a driver's license
permit.
You don't need a driver's license to drive an all-terrain vehicle, do you?
Do on county roads or on public roads if they're open. Is my
okay. But say to use one of these all-terrain vehicles on the sand dunes, do you need a motor vehicle license?
I don't believe so. I believe you need an ATV card. I don't know the exact name for that, but
is that for your vehicle, or is that for you as the driver?
For you as the driver.
Okay.
ATV is my understanding. We do have some ATV experts in the audience.
Okay.
John Ullman. Okay.
Okay. Well, maybe you guys can, if that's part of this, certainly it's part of the aftermath of this, but further educate us about the different licensing or non-licensing. Are there any other communities in Oregon that have done this where, we see the need for the recreation and the different types of recreation, the community obviously really wants it, and we want to be responsive to the community, but are there other communities that have wrestled with these vehicles are not designed for roads, but the proposal is to use them on roads?
It's my understanding there's at least a couple communities farther out eastern Oregon that have done this.
They have done it?
Yes.
So is that enough to say, okay, it's legal, we could do that?
I would like to have our own review of that done.
I see.
Because what I've read, I've bounced around in the ORS and the Senate Bill 344, and it's not clear to me, and I've read through it a few times.
Now, do you and I have a conflict of interest because you seem to be under the age of 55 and I seem to be over the age? Do we have a conflict?
Invincible still.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, you're still invincible. Apparently those 55-year-olds think so too.
Commissioner Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On occasion, I go down to Winchester Bay in Douglas County, and the access road that leads to county and maybe state and certainly federal park system down there, it's an improved road from the boat basin to the recreation area with sand dunes. There is a travel lane paralleling that road, essentially the shoulder, that is posted and says for ATV vehicles only, which I don't know why anybody else would be driving on the shoulder, but does that example apply at all here? Because I don't know if, I can't tell you if that's a county road. It appears to be. Winchester's unincorporated, but it gets heavy use, and they have a Dunes Festival there every spring. Sometimes I get down there in the middle of it, not as a person recreating in that way. I go down for the salt air and the view. But that to me seems like something very similar to what is being requested here is access to a county road. Now, recognizing that's Douglas County, and they do lots of things different down there, but are you familiar with that example? Or
Commissioner, our road maintenance manager might be familiar with that, but I'm not. But that may be something the board would want to consider to try to mitigate the risk here as having their own travel lane.
Thank you.
Okay.
Commissioner Leighton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do we know what the top speed of these side-by-sides are? Yes.
It depends.
If you don't mind coming up.
Yeah, no problem.
And if you wouldn't mind stating your name just so that the record has it.
Certainly. My name's John Omlin, O-M-L-I-N. And for full disclosure, I'm on the State ATV Highway Access Committee that was specifically set up under Senate Bill 344.
Perfect.
And I'm also a member of the Oregon Parks ATV Committee at Large.
Perfect.
I am not representing them at this meeting.
I totally understand.
So the top speed of a sport vehicle right now is generally restricted around 88 miles an hour.
88?
Yes. And they can be chipped to exceed that. And just a clarity, if I may, Senate Bill 344 deals specifically with access over state highways, period.
Yeah.
What you're looking for is ORS 820. And that's one that pertains to allowing ATVs access the local road authority, the authority to allow mixed use, as we refer to it, on the roads.
And I think it may have been mentioned, Dan, you may have mentioned it, but again, maybe I didn't hear it. So do you need to be licensed to drive one of these?
So Dan was correct in when the vehicle is on a highway that it does require an operator's license. So it'd be 16 and above.
Yeah.
When you're off highway, it requires two things. One is a safety card, which they refer to as their license, but it's really a safety card. And the second thing is an OHV permit. It's $10.50 for 2 years.
Okay. A couple things here. I mean, side-by-sides, I see them all the time, especially if you're in the ranching and farming business. They're constantly used for obvious reasons, and even ones with the big wheels just to get into certain areas that a pickup can't.
Yes.
And the load, and it's usually to maybe take some bags of fertilizer or feed out to somewhere. That's pretty common. When I was younger, growing up in Douglas County, it was pretty normal for us to take the four-wheeler up and just go mudding. I mean, that was just kind of common, only we did it in pickups. Right. And so it was just we were kids. Well, 16. Anyway, but some. Better stop there. Anyway, so I think I'm understanding where, and I'm glad, Mayor Coy, I'm glad you're here today, but I think I'm understanding where Oak Ridge is trying to go with this. And I because there's a real potential to capitalize on a lot of recreational activities. And I think that the biggest issue that we probably have to talk about to overcome, of course, is the risk assessment side of this. And so so I'll ask you this question based on maybe your task force experience, and how much of that conversation is out there and discussed when it comes to risk and safety, and are there certain pitfalls that will happen, that are what to avoid? Maybe just something like that would be kind of helpful as well, as we're talking about not just state highways, but now we're having this conversation about county roads too.
Right. So safety is the first thing that comes up every time we start these discussions.
Yeah.
Whether it's with the Forest Service, the cities, or the counties. And just a couple things. In the Senate, in the Senate Bill 344, if it's not specifically called out, which I think it is, they require financial responsibility, and that's generally how the cities and the counties that are allowing the mixed use are addressing that, as Oak Ridge did. So Oak Ridge requires a driver's license. It requires financial responsibility. There's a couple other criteria. The general goal is to not require additional equipment, because what happens is we travel 60 to 100 miles a day when we're in the forest. And that's what we're really talking about, is more forest riding than we are dunes riding. And so we come across sections of pavement that we're not allowed on, or in this case, we're trying to access outside the industrial park, which is a county road, and the Forest Service shares that, so we've got the request in the Forest Service. But anyway, safety is the biggest thing that comes up, and the no equipment requirements is so that we can travel from community to community and drive into that community to get food, fuel, services without having to change the equipment on our vehicle to meet the standards of Crescent Lake, Oak Ridge, Sweet Home, Detroit. So there's been a lot of discussion about it. Probably the biggest discussion is really the use of helmets, is what it really comes down to. And that's a big topic in Oregon.
Yeah.
The side-by-side community, I think I can safely say, is in favor of helmets. They're not opposed to them because they know what happens when you tumble in those vehicles. And by the way, the side-by-side would beat the car in a collision, in my opinion. Yeah. I've driven both a lot. Yeah.
And of course, with Sheriff Trapp here and getting an understanding, I mean, right now, obviously, we don't have a significant amount of patrol, so we don't have the law enforcement piece of it for the patrol. The other is, if something were to occur, were to happen, there's a challenge of getting to the person. Let's say there's an accident, there's an injury involved. There's some challenges as far as that's concerned as well. So I guess the other question I have, and maybe this is for Dan, this is maybe for you, and maybe from Oak Ridge, and that is, have you identified maybe some certain county roads that would be there would be some interest to open that up, to take a look at, because it seems to me you're not looking at, oh gee, let's veer over here, over here. There must be some sort of specifics involved here. And if that's the case, from my perspective, I think I'd be open to, moving forward to allow something like this would happen, but I think there has to be some conditions. And what they are right now, I'm not exactly sure. I think this is an opportunity to kind of feel those out. The other is, I think it'd be worth looking at this as almost kind of a pilot, and because you're getting away from the state roads, getting into the county roads, and so if we could have maybe a pilot where we have it set up to see how this works for maybe a year period, one year, and then come back and get a report back and then reevaluate after a year. I mean, that's kind of my general thought here, because of the legislation that's new, even for the state highway perspective, let alone on the county highway. So those are my initial thoughts right now, and I look forward to a conversation with my colleagues, and also maybe even hearing from Sheriff Trapp what his thoughts are from the patrol safety perspective as well. But those are generally where I'm at. I think, so many of our communities are looking to, I don't want to say reinvent themselves, that's the wrong word, but really to look for different opportunities to say, hey folks, come on in and take a look, and here's what we have to offer you. The sand dunes have been doing it for years, and this may be another opportunity to kind of explore where you can't really necessarily don't want to be on a pickup or a car, but instead you're kind of getting that, almost that outdoor feeling. So those are initial thoughts. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
If I may add 2 points. One is the demographic of the side-by-side user is generally 45 and above. I think there's a lot of, not quite up to 54, but the whole perception of the ATV rider has changed. There's speed, there's a lot of congestion in the dunes. When you get in the forest, we're out there today, we hardly see anyone, and we're driving by these communities today. So the potential for low-hanging fruit for these rural communities for economic gain is literally right there to grasp. And we're talking about 4 miles. We're talking about 6 miles. We're talking about, specific destinations, which you mentioned, as opposed to just saying, let's go for it.
Yeah.
We're really trying to say, we'll come and we'll say we like point A to point B. And here's the reason why. And you're going to see us to connect the community.
Very good.
And we can offer, we've gone down this path with a lot of other road authorities, if you will, and we can provide you with a lot of information that may answer a lot of these questions that you guys have, because they've already been asked sometime, and we have a library of information we can share with you.
Okay, thanks.
So I'd like to invite Mayor Coey maybe to come up and take a seat, and I see he's just dying to get in on the conversation here.
I'll work on getting a map up.
Yeah.
Jim Coey, Mayor of Oak Ridge. We're talking about, well, as far as cities, Lakeview and John Day already have this approved. I've just spent the last 2 days at Lakeview at the behest of Travel Oregon. Their county has also approved it. So there are jurisdictions in this state that have already done it. And the data that we have is that there's been virtually no incident. You have other cities like Sweet Home and Detroit and McKinsey and Florence that are all chomping at the bit for this as well. It is something that helps us recreate ourselves. It adds to our shoulder season specifically, I see, that when it's fall and winter and spring and wet. As far as the roads we're asking for, obviously we'd like to have them all. But, we've asked for 3 specifically, and that would be Fish Hatchery Road from East First to the highway, and actually just to Hall Road, which is our road. East First Street from the city limits to the Forest Service boundary, and then Kitson Hot Springs Road from Hall Road and junction of Forest Service 23 to basically CT Beach, which is the Forest Service boundary. We're looking at maybe 8 miles total out of these 3 roads, and half of that total is within our IGA that we have with you currently. That is for event-based, but it's still within a mile of our UGB. So we see it as something that's very beneficial for us. We did put conditions on it. We took the we took the state regulations on it, and then we adapted from that. So they do have to be 16. They do have to have safety. There are conditions to it. And we also put a caveat in there that in 1 year we're going to review it. We're getting a lot of favoritism on it. A lot of people are very happy about it. It's only been in action a month, yesterday I think it was. But we're seeing it as just something that helps benefit our tourism industry. I've been in it. John welcomed us over at the coast on the dunes, and I mean, you have a 5-point harness, you got a full wrap seat, you got roll cage, you have power to get out of the way if you need to. The roads that we're talking about are on the far east side, and it's conducive for us because those are the connectors to the Forest Service. From there, Forest Service has no problems with these vehicles on gravel. We're pushing to get the access on the paved roads, which are, again, the access points to the routes. So,
Excellent.
Commissioner Williams?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple questions here. Are these licensed vehicles?
No, DMV, anecdotally, DMV says they don't want to license them. I haven't been through all the conversations, but there's not an attempt to make them street legal, and there's no attempt to license them. there is a permit fee.
Second question regarding insurance. Is there insurance coverage on a vehicle like that that's mandated? And further, are there requirements for personal liability insurance if an operator is involved in an event that might put the county in a liability position? Seems to me like the rider would probably want to be the person in first position for liability. So can you address the insurance components if there are any?
I would have to go double check, but I believe that it basically states that it's a financial responsibility that an operator must carry without specifically stating limits of insurance. I know that numerous counties, or I'm sorry, I should say the cities have put that in their ordinance as far as requiring additional financial responsibility, but it's generally left at the term financial responsibility that I've seen.
I have a note that for the state designated ATV highway access routes that liability insurance coverage is required.
Okay.
Go ahead, Jim.
Can I address the public safety that was brought up? So we already handle the public safety in that area as far as EMS and as far as PD generally. So as far as response time, we're there. So it's not like we're having to wait for county EMS or for the sheriff to arrive to handle any incident that may arrive.
And you're generally talking, in the case that the mayor's talking about, it's the first 6 miles from the town or the community out to the roads. We're already out that far, and we're much deeper in the forest right now. So that we still have the same safety concerns as a recreation. Whether or not we trailered over those 6 miles and unloaded 6 miles out, what we're really trying to do is be able to travel that 6 miles, if you will, because otherwise we'll drive by Oak Ridge. Once we load it up, we're not stopping. We're headed home, right? This way, we're in Oak Ridge in this particular scenario, and it's likely that we'll just drive down to the gas station and fuel up or grab a burger while we're still on the side-by-side before we trailer up and go. So you can see how that kind of changes the whole recreational experience, too. And it keeps them in the community.
And we always like that brew pub there.
We are building a staging area that will be at the OIP. They're off Fish Hatchery Road. So there'll be RV access, there'll be trailer access, there'll be showers, bathrooms, equipment wash, bike wash, et cetera. So we are building that as we speak.
So I'm going to put myself in the queue here. I got a couple questions, and this is where we might have to make room for Andy, because I'm going to ask some legal questions here. So as I look at ORS 810, basically in the very opening section, 810.10, jurisdiction over highways, it pretty clearly says under number 2, the county governing body is the road authority for all county roads outside the boundaries of an incorporated city. And looking, through things, we're allowed to do things like close down traffic for a parade, or I've gotten permits from the county to run bicycle races on county roadways and slow traffic and detour traffic for a bicycle race. So I'm kind of wondering, there was some question about whether we have the authority to grant this or not. And as I'm looking at the ORS 344, it kind of puts for state highways that responsibility for designating routes to the Oregon Transportation Commission for state highways. Are you prepared to answer whether or not we really do have jurisdiction over our own county roadways, and whether we do have the authority to grant this permission for Class 4 ATVs to travel the 6 miles of county roadway to access the forest?
Yeah, I certainly think the county has authority over its roads. I won't tell you that otherwise. And I think to the answer to the last question is yes, generally I think so. It's not abundantly clear in it's 821, I think, that deals with ATVs. And yeah, I think the language folks point to for authority probably assumes a certain level of authority anyway, so it's not really explicit to say county has the authority to do X, Y, and Z. I think they presume it's there already. The language is that you can operate one of these on a highway where it's posted to permit snowmobiles or all-terrain vehicles. So, it's not an explicit grant of authority, but I think you're right. I think generally the counties have that authority built in already. But I haven't done the research to say, here it is, but I'm fairly sure it's there. Interesting, I did notice in another section of the Motor Vehicle Code, I think it is, which is 801-040, which prohibits the counties and cities, I think the state, from charging a fee for the use of these roads. You wouldn't be able to set up a fee system. Interestingly, though, in that statute, it does say that nothing there prohibits the counties and cities from otherwise regulating the use of the road. And so I think that's another sort of backhand into the idea that, the county, I think, has this authority. Yeah, and there is that distinction between 821 generally talks about highways. The new law talks about state highways. And I think that's probably what they're set up to deal with.
Yeah, I think that if at least my go through the ORS and not being an attorney, and I didn't stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night. At least my reading is it doesn't specifically say counties can grant that access, but nowhere does it prohibit us, and it very widely grants us authority over our own roadways, which means they would have to argue, this is kind of like a lot of stuff that's under, matters of county concern. They would have to show us specifically where the state's prohibited us that authority as a home rule county. So I'm comfortable with the fact that we have this authority from my reading of the laws, and so that's not a question to me. Then the question becomes things about liability, et cetera. But I think that's somewhat minor. We have liability for people traveling our roadways all the time. We allow bicycles and cars on the same roadway. In fact, we have to by law, yet we're not liable if a bike and a car get in an accident unless they can prove there's some negligence in our design or maintenance of the roadway. That's really what it comes down to, and I think we'd be in the same position with a Class 4 ATV. They would have to show that there was something about our design of the roadway that caused that accident to happen, and the allowance of that, particularly seeing there's state law that allows state to have that and doesn't necessarily make the state liable for if the OTC designates a route, which gets me to the point where I think we need to ask the OTC to designate Highway 101 as a designated route between the South Jetty Road and the turnoff to Old Town Florence, but that's a whole nother.
That's tomorrow's conversation I'm having over there. Seriously.
Is it?
Yes.
Great. So wow. Great minds think alike. As I think about, as soon as Mayor Coey started talking about this at one of the mayor's quarterly meetings that LCOG sponsors, had to be a year ago. I think you mentioned this, something that was because I'm West Lane and Florence is in my district. I immediately started thinking about how could my district benefit from this, and where are the opportunities for ATV tourism with some of my local communities, and definitively I see Florence as a strong tie for that, and I also can see some of the other more rural communities that have a lot of forest access roads like Mapleton and even up in the Triangle Lake Blatchley area where there may be some designation of county roadways to get between those communities and some of those very popular off-road Forest Service and BLM roadways that are out there that you guys like to ride on. So I'm in favor of us looking further into this, I'd be interested to hear if there is any real concerns from either the sheriff's office or the roads folks about liability beyond what we've talked about. But I truly think there is such a strong tourism benefit to this that I think that it's something we need to continue to look at.
If I could just throw out, I think the issue, I think you're right, but liability is always going to be an issue. And the question is, what does a county want to do to protect itself? The claim is easy. I mean, if you've got an accident between an ATV and a vehicle, there's going to be a claim by people in the vehicle that the ATV pulled out in front of them or something like that. It has nothing to do potentially with the county road design that's different than any auto-to-auto accident. But there's going to be the claim that but for the county's allowance of these things on the roadway, this wouldn't have happened. And now you've got the county as part of that lawsuit. The question is, what do you want to do to protect and insure yourself, the county itself, against those sorts of claims? The city's ordinance has a provision. I doubt it's going to be effective, honestly, where they're not assuming the liability. I don't think the county's going to have the option to say, no, thanks, we don't want the liability. It's going to be there. And so it's a question really of insurance.
Yeah. And I think that's where, if we're requiring a driver's license, under that driver's license, that ATV driver should have known not to pull out in front of somebody. Or that he needs to be visible, has to use turn signals, all the things you're supposed to be able to do. Requiring the helmets, the various things that we require those vehicles to travel on our roadways will be some of that, prophylactic protection against a lawsuit. Anybody can sue you for anything, though, whether they're successful or not, and they actually show one harm to that you're involved in that harm. We got sued for not correctly posting a dead end by a motorcycle rider that ran through a dead end sign and then through the dead end barrier not too long ago, and successfully defended the county on that one. So we're always have the possibility of being sued over our road system.
And I think in this case, it makes sense to make sure we check with the insurer and the self-insurance program to make sure this wouldn't be anything additional that we would need to extend for.
Yeah, I think that's prudent.
One more thing. So these vehicles also, they're not cheap. They cost as much as a new car. 27 probably is the average price? 25 to 27,000. So it's not like it's some little tube racer that somebody made and is out there doing something. There's definitely some financial, how would you say that, responsibility here.
Yeah, there's a reason why we're talking about Class 4 and not all classes of all-terrain vehicles.
Very much.
It's a very different vehicle.
Yeah. Well, the Class 3s have already come to us asking for approval too, and we're like, yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. Commissioner Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Recognizing that the demographic age group is 55 old white guys, basically. It goes back to the insurance question that I had, and I think most men 55 years or older already have an insurance coverage through vehicle, but there's also the opportunity if a person, for whatever reason, didn't have vehicle insurance, they could obtain personal liability umbrella policies or something like that, I think I totally support this concept and what you're hoping to achieve. Totally support that. The only thing that really from my perspective needs to be fleshed out is the insurance issue, to make sure that people out there using our roads are insured, and that's really all I ask.
One other just comment, if I may, with that regard, when the ATVs are on the highway, they're governed by highway rules, which was interesting to me. Even I found that out through the work that I'm doing, that with regard to the seatbelt, as an example, the vehicle is required to have a seatbelt. It's not required to use a seatbelt when you're not on a highway. So out in the woods, as long as your vehicle has a seatbelt, you don't have to have it clipped. Okay, the minute you hit the road, you got to clip it.
Yeah.
So there are specific rules and regulations about roads and highways when that vehicle is allowed, if and when that vehicle is allowed. They follow the motor vehicle rules.
Commissioner Williams.
Thank you for the opportunity to follow up on that. So I know we have the sheriff here, and I would just like to know if when you're on a state or a county highway, seatbelt law applies, would not also insurance law apply? And if there's some clarity on that anybody could offer, I'd be most grateful.
Hopefully, I'll spend all day up here. Chair Bosevich and members of the board, thank you. I don't want to be the wet blanket on this, but I do have some probably less than positive commentary, and it's not against the program. And I'm not, I read through the measure that's attached to the supporting documents today, and I'd have to do a little more research to see exactly what highway rules apply. I would assume, as it's been stated, that all rules of the road apply to any vehicle operated on what's considered a highway, to open to all vehicles. There are differences when you're, say, on the sand dunes. But there are some similarities there. You can't be suspended or have your driving privileges suspended or revoked, but you don't have to have a driver's license. And so if you're driving a quad out on the sand and you're suspended for not having insurance or a DUI, then you're unlawfully operating a quad on the sand. But if you're not suspended, you're not required to have a driver. So there are a lot of very interesting nuances to the laws that you have to be somewhat of an expert in that field. And so I'm removed from that by a few years, but I do have some experience with sand dune quad enforcement, and there are a lot of challenges to that. So hopefully that was answering your specific question. And then if you had a moment, I'd be happy to share a couple other comments and I can get out of your way.
Yeah, I'd be happy. I was going to call on you relatively soon.
Okay.
I wanted to hear from you and public works staff if they've got any input they'd like to supply.
So in general, I just had a couple of points I wanted to just make sure we are all aware of. It's been stated I think there's over 6 miles of what looked like on the map attached, at least county road, that might be affected. This will be an added user group, and I'm pretty confident to say it's not going to have added policing. And we need to be prepared as the county and as you as board members who often refer your citizen members to me or inquire of my office on complaints of lack of service. This will add to that complaint of lack of service and lack of responsiveness. I did hear it stated that the City of Oak Ridge Police Department is willing to respond when there's an emergency event like a ATV crash. I would venture to say, especially during event times, that the city will have a more vested interest in policing their city than they will be policing the county roads. And I can tell you from my personal experience working the sand dunes, if these vehicles aren't policed, it is lawless. And we have fatalities every year in our sand dunes. We do have a deputy specifically providing 40 hours a week under a full-time employee contract to police nothing but the sand dunes through the ATV committee funding. That's been a long-standing contract, and it's woefully inadequate as far as managing all of the behavior on the sands, especially during the holiday weekends. This would add another demand to our limited services. We're not going to be able to share the Florence Dunes deputy based on contract, but also based on differences or geography. We're at opposite ends of a county 100 miles wide, so I don't know, really how to express that strongly enough that this is an added service demand, and we're not adding service. I think it would probably be appropriate to consider looking at funding options that would be sourced through promoters of events, and I would be, I guess, cautiously supportive of a seasonal application of this to the roads as opposed to a year-long unpoliced event. and trying to meet those challenges. I understand that we can have a one-year sample and see what that looks like, and we don't have a fatality. We can probably go back and count Dunes years that have no fatalities, but then I can find a couple of Dunes years where we have 3 to 5 fatalities, and they range from small elementary school children to old white guys. So it runs the spectrum of users. I also know that when these vehicles are allowed to operate on pavement, not necessarily intentionally, but they operate at higher speeds. It's just smoother, doesn't feel as fast, and I would not want to be the one in the car testing whether the side-by-side versus a car, who's the winner in that. I think maybe against a smart car you might be an even bet, but in any other full-size vehicle I think it's going to be a challenge to have a side-by-side or any other ATV operator survive uninjured in those kinds of collisions. So I have a lot of reservation about how we apply this. I'm also concerned that we need to recognize, and we've talked about it with the Sheriff's Office for years, lack of adequate policing of our county does have limitations on economic viability of our county. And I think this is a perfect example of where we're challenged to embrace all economic activity without fully funding the public safety component that I think responsibly goes with that. And I will never advocate abdicating my jurisdictional authority to other jurisdictions. I think it's on our best interest in Lane County to fund the Sheriff's Office, to provide the public safety that the county is obligated to provide, and not rely on other jurisdictions to provide that in our office's absence, and marginalize the community's perspective of what's needed in the broader community. And I get that we might make a pocket of Lane County work for a minute, but then again, I don't think we can rely on that service for full-time policing and addressing this as we add the service demand. So again, I not want to be a wet blanket. I just want to make sure we go into this with our eyes wide open, and that a year or two from now that we don't find ourselves really surprised that there's more complaints the Sheriff's Office is inadequate in our response, or that we're not doing our job. And that's the kinds of things I see growing from providing a new service demand without the service to go with it.
So while you're still there, you kind of mentioned something in it, and I was thinking of it before you even mentioned it, was about contracts and seasonal work. Oregon Country Fair, high demand on our road system for a short period of time, and they contract with your offices for overtime staff for both on-site and off-site patrol. Plus, you utilize some state grant money, I think, at the same time for Dewey patrol. Is that kind of what you'd be a little bit more comfortable if we could develop some kind of with whoever's holding the festival in Oak Ridge, if they were willing to enter into that sort of contractual relationship with your department to bring overtime staff into that area for that event, but not necessarily for an open all the time sort of event.
Right,
So
yeah.
think,
If this was a seasonal application and there was a 2-week time that the ATV activity was permitted on the roadway, and there was a weekend or multiple day event, and there was the ability to contract directly for enhanced services during that time, that would be much more palatable for me, that I would know we would have resources there that would be actively patrolling, and that it wouldn't be an annual ongoing unpatrolled activity all year long. But when we did have that activity, we could apply resources there to keep the speeds down, to keep the multiple user interface somewhat organized and controlled. And I do understand that the demographic is the older male in this, but I guarantee you there's going to be young kids that aren't 16 that are taking dad's machine down the road. And those are the things that need policed, and those are where our tragedies come from. And if there are no cop cars seen up there, it's going to happen. And so there has to be a visibility to have a deterrent. And so especially when we have the high activity, that's one of the biggest efforts we try to do during the country fair, is we have few police vehicles in the fair, at the fair area, in the Veneta Elmira area. I've had comments many times from fairgoers that are questioning how many deputies are out there because there must be 20 cars, and we're running 3 or 4 cars. But our direction to our staff has been be active and be visible. I expect if you're not out with a violator that you're looking for one, and so when they see our cars, most of the time they see our cars with our lights on, and it just looks like there's a lot of deputies. And it has an incredible deterrent effect. And so all of those things go with staffing adequately an event weekend to provide that level of service. And we could certainly have those conversations and look at what that looks like. I don't know, where the source of the revenue would come from, and that'd be a little more involved conversation to explore.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. The demographic for the country fair is kind of getting like the Dunes riders. It's been around for a while, so yeah. Generally, the ones that are getting in trouble are the kids and the grandkids of the fair goers, not necessarily the majority of the fair goers. So yeah, so if we were to, in your mind, you'd like to kind of see this done more as a seasonal pilot and look at that contracting and maybe see where we go from there, and then maybe look towards expanding that in the future if we can figure out a way to expand rural patrol with it.
Right. I think that's close to the correct summary. I think more of what I'm trying to impart is that if there's an expectation that it be adequately policed, I think it has to be limited to an event-driven authorization with some funded level of contracted law enforcement to specifically attend to the event, not unlike the country fair you mentioned. And so beyond that, I'm not necessarily going to, stomp my feet up and down in anger if you guys grant it for a full here on out. It's just 365 all year round. My comments are merely to make sure that we all recognize that there's going to be an increased demand on law enforcement. While we do have a law enforcement partner agency that's willing to respond to those tragedies and emergency events, they're not going to be policing this because their city is going to be busy, and the mayor, I'm sure, wants his police officers in the city and not out spending hours on end on county roads outside the city. And that is the only way to effectively police this kind of activity. So if there's an expectation to police it, then from our current resource level, it has to be limited. If the board is willing to accept the whatever the fallout is from the community on not policing it, then I just want to make sure we're all seeing that, and that I'm not able to step up with this as a partner and say, this is a great deal, and I'll make sure I have a deputy up there anytime that there's a weekend of off-road vehicles on the highway.
So, Commissioner Sorensen?
Yeah, I was going to ask, how do these events, or are there events, or are they all the time, or can you give us a little more info on you mentioned the shoulder season, or maybe the mayor did, that there's periods of time when from a rider's point of view, that there's before the snow falls kind of thing, or is it all winter, spring, and summer, not winter because of snow? I mean, give us an idea of that.
So we ride year-round.
Year-round?
We ride year-round. So we started the Side-by-Side Festival up in Oak Ridge in order to bring awareness, not only about to the potential opportunities for the community, but also to demonstrate the blockades that exist in the forest around our recreation. Anytime you hit a piece of pavement, we can't go on it. So that means we trailer.
Okay. What is the time of the festival?
So the festival this year is July 6th, 7th, and 8th.
Okay.
And it was our hope to change the festival a little bit and start having events. I should call them rides, because the rides are just basically a loosely organized Facebook group that says, I'm going to be at, if it's on the coast, I'm going to be at Riley Ranch at 10 o'clock, and we're taking off, or I'm going to be at Florence. So we want to do the same thing in Oak Ridge, say, hey, we're going to be leaving the industrial park at 10 o'clock, we're heading up to Warner Lookout. Well, we can't do that today because we've got these blockades in the way.
Okay.
So we'd like to have rides with the Tree Planting Festival, the 4th of July, the 6 concert series around them. And the idea is to bring more revenue into the town and to bring another audience into the town.
Okay.
Maybe they'll stay a little longer. Maybe they'll come back later. So while the festival is really an awareness objective, it's more about year-round. And then the opportunity to promote shoulder season rides. I got a snowplow. I got tracks. I mean, I can get a bunch of people that got tracks together and we'll go, play in the snow. It's just, we wouldn't be able to leave from Oak Ridge. We'd have to drive out in the forest and find it. So it's trying to.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Lycan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess the question I have, this is to Dan, so you're the point person on this. We're trying to give you direction on where to go. I guess I'm not too surprised to hear from Sheriff Trapp on especially on the safety piece. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, that's the responsibility of the sheriff, and so I appreciate that. I still believe that I would like for you to continue to go forward to gather information and see where this goes. I don't think this isn't a dated, for decision making. I think what we're trying to do is provide direction to you and see if something like this can, ultimately make sense. And the other piece, and I'm glad the sheriff brought up the smart car. I got to tell you, for me personally, those cars scare the hell out of me. I saw an article the other day where one hit a squirrel and totaled it, but anyway, not quite that bad. But anyway, so I'll be honest with you, those cars scare me to death. Especially I see one on the freeway and I'm going, I'm not sure I'd want to be in that one looking up at that Freightliner, but that's just me. And but I think on this, I'm open to continue to going down this road. I think we've given you some direction. Obviously this is in Gary's district, and he's pretty interested in also moving forward. I'm glad to hear, Mayor, that that as Oak Ridge, you were putting conditions on this, and I think that's a key piece. I don't know how this is going to fly, and even if this became something that we agreed and move forward on as far as an ordinance is concerned, but I'm a strong believer in when you get something like this brand new that you create a pilot and you give it a year and see if it makes sense. And if it comes back and there are accidents and it just doesn't make sense and we're responsible for the county roadway, then we can obviously pull the plug too. So I look forward to, for this to potentially come back and see where we go from here. But I'm glad to see, Mayor, that Oak Ridge continues to think out of the box. It's no different than the conversation you've had with UP and Amtrak on the whistle stop, and I mean these are ideas that I think are with our communities around that were some at one time were major timber communities, and today you continued looking for what are the opportunities to attract people to come and visit. This is potentially one of them, so I salute you on that. And but that's my thoughts overall. I'm fine. Go ahead and continue the conversation and see where this goes. But I do appreciate Sheriff Trapp's comments. Like I said before, I'm not very surprised. I kind of thought that may be where he was thinking, considering his responsibility when it comes to the safety of our county roads and the patrol of our roads. So appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mayor Coey.
And I understand the public safety side. And, we already cover 2,400 square miles with public safety, and we supply police and EMS for Veneta and police for Lowell. And the Forest Service, we have a contract with them, and, it's tenuous. And we all understand that. Would we love to have more coverage? Absolutely. We just see this as something that hopefully, and again, we are doing this in a pilot program. It's under review in 1 year, and we'll evaluate at that point and see whether it's something that so far the receptivity over the last 2 years with the events we've had, there's been no incidents. We've had contact with Lakeview, and there's been no incidents there. And like I said, I just spent the last 2 days out there, and they're developing more and more as well. So hopefully this is something that'll work out for us all. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments from the board? Any wrap up from staff or?
No, thank you, Commissioners. I'll continue to work with the city and explore some options. We'll bring more analysis in return for more consideration on the issue.
Great conversation. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
So that brings us to review of assignments. See how good Steve's memory is.
Yeah.
Or note taking.
I just had 2 items, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Lycan asked, I don't know that this is an assignment, but I think maybe we'll add it to the assignments list and we can update agenda team and update the board at the next meeting in 2 weeks regarding the process and timeline for land management to return with an update on ADU regulations in the UGB. So I did have a conversation with Mr. Kyler at the break. It's my understanding that Keir Miller is working on that and is engaged with the cities on that issue, but we'll get a date for when that is planned to come to the board for an update, or ensure that it does come to the board for an update in the near future. The other item was a request that staff, from Commissioner Lycan, that staff remain engaged in the 2021 conversations, particularly with the city of Springfield regarding the potential of an indoor track. And that did come up at our Springfield Eugene Lane Cell breakfast last week. Gino Grimaldi, the city manager in Springfield, brought it up, so we are aware of it. And we are, I think you know, Greg Rickoff is serving on one of the committees, the steering committee for Oregon 2021. And so I think they had a meeting today, or yesterday. So we're actively engaged in those conversations, but we certainly will make sure that our staff continues to partner with Springfield on that particular item. So those are just the 2 that I had.
Excellent. Any assignments missed?
Just one, Commissioner Lycan, you talked about the 2 heroes from Springfield.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I think I think that that's one maybe we can discuss at agenda review and talk about if there's potentially, we can either have them, we don't want to interfere with their work, of course. Either we can have them or we can go out there or just even some way to recognize their life-saving efforts, which is pretty, as I stated, pretty incredible that what occurred.
So why don't we make a note to talk about that at agenda team about what the appropriate recognition would be for those individuals.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. Thanks, Commissioner.
Can we get the free Liberty tickets too?
Yeah, I'm sorry. So any other business for the board today? Seeing none, then we are adjourned.